Numbers chapter 13. I'm going to start reading in verse 17. It says, "And Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said unto them, Get you up this way southward, and go up into the mountain, and see the land, what it is, and the people that dwelleth therein, whether they be strong or weak, few or many. And what the land is that they dwell in, whether it be good or bad, and what cities they be that they dwell in, whether in tents or in strongholds, and what the land is, whether it be fat or lean, and whether it be fat or lean, whether there be wood therein or not, and be of good courage, and bring the fruit of the land." Now the time was the time of the first ripe grapes. So they went up and searched the land from the wilderness of Zin unto Rehab, as men come to Hamath. And we'll stop right there. We're going to go through a lot of this chapter as we get through the message, but we'll stop there for right now. Be seated. As I said, as we go through the message tonight, we're going to look at a good portion of Numbers chapter 13, as well as a little bit of Numbers chapter 14. Obviously, I wasn't going to have us read all of that as we start out. Last week, we were in Numbers chapter 10, and I mentioned that in Numbers 10 that we're not far from the promised land, that there was only a few chapters until they sent the spies. Well, here it is. The children of Israel have now come to the border of the land that God has promised them. And I think we need to remember that as we get into this, because we know how the passage goes, that they decide that they can't take the land, even though God has already promised it to them. It isn't like this is just a piece of land that Moses has decided on. He isn't just saying, we're probably far enough from Egypt and I'm tired of leading this annoying people, so there's an area, look, let's stop here. That's not what's happening. No, this is a land that God has promised to give you. Let's put it in our terms. That would be the difference between me saying, Brother Randy, I have $20 I want to give you, or Brother Randy just saying, Pastor Caleb has $20, I think I can get it from him. There's a difference. There's a big difference there. This has been promised to them, and better than just that, it's been promised by God. This isn't just the promise of some man. Again, I use Moses because he is their leader at this point, but this isn't just a promise that Moses made to get them to follow him out of Egypt. This wasn't just Moses saying, if you'll follow me, I'll take you to a land. This isn't just him. He didn't just say, if you'll follow me out of Egypt and leave your bondage, I'll find you a place to live. I promise I'll give you a land. No, this promise was from God. That carries a lot more weight to it than just some guy. But better than that, this promise wasn't just for them. This promise wasn't just for the current generation. It was for your people for all generations. That's a big deal. That's a big deal. When I was, 16, 17, 18, I didn't think much about that sort of thing. At that age, you're selfish most of the time. You're thinking about what's going to benefit you the most right now. I'm pretty sure at 16, 17, 18, I had someone at about 16 ask me what my 10-year plan was. And at 16 years old, I thought, 10-year plan? I'm 16 years old. I don't know what my 1-year plan is. I had no idea. When you're that age, you're not thinking long term. The older I get, having kids and those sorts of things, the more I think about what am I leaving them, and the importance of leaving the right kind of heritage for them, not necessarily financially, but spiritually. This promise that they're getting here is long term. This isn't just for them until they die and then their kids are on their own. This is for generations to come. That's a big deal. This is a big thing. And as we go through this chapter and into the next, you see the word go, because again, that's our series. You see the word go and the idea of going found all throughout it. And what I've done this evening, with what we've looked at in mind, what I've done this evening is broken this into 4 main areas that I want us to look at tonight. And then at the end, I'll make a pretty simple application. The first thing I see is a command to go. Look at chapter 13, verse 1. And then we're going to skip down a little bit. But verse 1 and 2. "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Send thou men, that they may search the land of Canaan, which I give unto the children of Israel, and of the children of Israel, of every tribe of their fathers shall ye send a man, every one a ruler among them. Skip down to verse 17 where we started. And Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan and said unto them, get you up up this way southward and go up into the mountain. Two different areas here where we see this. Verses 1 through 16, we obviously didn't read all of that, but 1 through 16 is God talking to Moses, telling him, send men into the land. Verses 17 through 20 is Moses talking to the men that he's sending. And I want us to notice real quickly the difference before we move too far tonight, the difference between what the two say. And while it may seem small, insignificant, I believe it actually plays a pretty big role in what happens as we go further in here. When God is telling Moses, here's kind of God's side of it. God tells Moses that what he wants Moses to get the spies to search out the land which he is going to give them. That's how he words it. I want them to search out the land which I will give you. That's pretty simple. I want you to go and look at it. And then he throws in there the reassurance that I will give you. You're just going to see. Not that your army is going to take, not that your strength will take, but I. But that isn't how Moses relays the message. 17 through 20, Moses' side of it, Moses gathers the men that God tells him to and says, I'm sending you in a land to search it and spy it, like God said. But then Moses adds, to see if the people are strong or weak, to see if the land is good, to see whether the land is fat or lean, and to see if they live in tents or strongholds. That's not what God said. That isn't why God wanted spies to go there. God's already promised them the land. God already knows that it's a good land. God already knows that things will grow there. God already knew what kind of houses they lived in. Yeah. And if he's going to give you the land and fight the battles for you, what does it matter if they live in tents or huge walled cities? You don't have to do anything but stand back and watch God work. There's a big difference in what they say because God already knows that he's going to give them the land. What Moses is doing, Moses is making a backup plan. That's what this is. Moses is saying, I know God told us that he's going to give us the land, but if he doesn't, can we take him? It's what he's telling his spies. I know God says he's going to give us the land, but here's what I want you to do. I want you to look and see if he doesn't come through on this one, will we be able to beat him ourselves? Can we do this? That's what this is. It's figuring out if God doesn't deliver on what he promised, on what he says he will, can we handle this on our own? And we never do that sort of thing, do we? We never say, I trust God outwardly, while inwardly we're thinking of ways to handle it on our own, just in case he doesn't. A few months ago, there we go, that's what I'm looking for. A few months back, I had a conversation with someone, and they were worried about some financial things, and I said, do you trust God? And over they kept saying, well, yes, but, no, do you trust God? Well, yes, but no, do you trust God? And finally I stopped him and said, it's a yes or no question. Either you trust him to do it, and it ends there, or you don't really trust him to do it. Which is it? And that's what's happening here with Moses. He's saying, I know God says that he will give us the land, but if not, can I still get it? So what's happening here? And setting all of that aside for a few minutes, what we have here in this point is a command to go. We're going to kind of come back to that idea later in the message, but what we have here is a command to go. You'll notice God doesn't say, Moses, if it'll make you more at ease, if it'll make you feel better, if you'll be more comfortable, you can send men in to check on the land before moving forward. It's not what he says. He says, send men. This isn't an option. And you'll notice that a lot with God. You don't see a lot of examples of God giving people options to go, but instead telling them, go. My personal devotions lately, I'm just finishing up the book of Acts, in which you see phrases used like we were constrained to go. don't know if you know much about constrained. That doesn't mean we were given an option. If we really wanted to, we could go. No, it's more like we had to.
Yeah.
It's like if I tell my kids, go upstairs and get ready for bed. I'm not giving them an option. I'm not, saying, now if you really feel tired and would like to, you can go upstairs and change and brush your teeth and go to bed. No, when I tell my kids it's time to go upstairs and get ready for bed, that's a command. It means you better do it and do it now. That's what's happening here. This is a command from God. Go. The next thing I see is a call to go again. You look at verse 30, skip down to verse 30, it says, and Caleb stilled the people. It says, now the spies have come back. And Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. If you skip down to chapter 14, verse 8, it says, and if the Lord delight in us, he will bring us into this land and give it us, a land that floweth with milk and honey. They're gone for 40 days. I didn't have us read the entire text here, but they're gone for 40 days. We've already seen, I think it was a few weeks back, the people get really restless when you're gone for any sort of period of time, and the spies come back, and the initial report isn't great. You look at verse 27 through 29, and this is right when they get back, and they told them and said, we came on a land whither thou sentest us, and surely it floweth with milk and honey. And this is the fruit of it. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land. The cities are walled and very great. Moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and by the coast of Jordan. They come back and say, yep, God was right, flowing with milk and honey. This is a good land flowing with milk and honey. Look at the size of these grapes. That sort of speaks for itself type thing. However, in fact, the way it words it, nevertheless, they're big, strong people, and they're going to smash us like a bug. It's in essence what they're saying. Yeah, it's a good land. God wasn't lying. Flowing with milk and honey, fruit's great, giants. We're going to die. And it gets the people in a frenzy. We can see that because we see the start of verse 30 where Caleb is speaking that he has to still the people. He's having to calm them down. And here's what Caleb does. He doesn't try to deny what was said. You notice nowhere in what he says does he say, nah, they're not giants. He doesn't try to bring down what they're saying at all. He doesn't try to downplay the problems that may lie ahead, which will often do that sort of thing, try to play it out as not that bad. That's not what he did, but he instead said, let's go, we can overcome. And here's why Caleb could be so confident in that, because he knew it wasn't their own strength that they would need to overcome. We looked at chapter 14, verse 8. He says, if the Lord delight in us, then he will bring us into land and give it us. He says it in two ways, that if God delights in us, if we go, God will bring us in. He'll show us the way. Obviously, in a situation like this, there's going to be multiple ways. If you're at the border of a country, there's probably more than one way you can walk across the border. There's going to be more than one way to go about this, just like anything else that we face. There's more than one way that something can get done. Lisa and I were talking about this. I was watching something a few weeks back. The guy used the analogy of there's more than one way to skin a cat, and then stopped and said, that's a really disgusting analogy. And it really is. But there's more than one way to tackle a problem. But rather than them trying to figure it out on their own, Caleb says God will lead us in his way. But not only that, God's going to give it. He'll give us the victory, like he's said over and over and over, that he'll give us the land. If God was just leading them in, had God said, I will lead you to the land, and then at that point saying, now you're on your own to take it, this would have been bad news. Now, I don't know how big the people were. The spies come back saying they're giants and talking about how big they are. And then they describe them as giants. They describe them as strong. They describe them as that we are bugs in their sight. And I was thinking about it as today, actually, as I was writing this all out. I'm pretty sure that's an exaggeration. My math may be off because I just jotted this down real fast. Grasshopper's about 2 inches long. Average man is about 6 feet tall, 72 inches, which means I'm 36 times bigger than a grasshopper. So if they're saying we're as grasshoppers in their sight, that would mean they're claiming that these giants are 216 feet tall. So I'm pretty sure that this is a bit of an exaggeration here, what they're saying. But regardless, it's a strong people with giants. Maybe not 216 foot tall giants, but big people. Without God, they could not have won. I said it last week, this isn't an army that's being led out of Egypt, they're slaves. These aren't trained soldiers, these are people who have been in bondage for years. If they were trained soldiers, they would have gotten out of Egypt years ago on their own strength. They're not. But none of that mattered because God was going to give the land. So Caleb gives a call, and I have it worded this way, a call to go again. We already have the call to go from God originally, and now Caleb is again saying, let's go. We've gone in, we've spied the land, now let's take it. God's delighted in us, He'll lead us in, He'll give it to us, let's go. He's excited, He's ready. The only problem is, He's the minority. Which leads into the next point. We've seen a command to go, a call to go, and then number 3, a cry about going. Look at chapter 13, verse 31, but it's right after Caleb speaks. But the men that went up with him said, we be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they brought up an evil report of the land, which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof. And all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature, and there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we are in our own sight as grasshoppers, so we were in their sight. And all the congregation lifted up their voice and cried, and the people wept that night. The original report comes in. I mentioned it isn't great. And pointed out some good points, but also some bad. Then they hear from Joshua and Caleb, who are saying, this is fine. God's leading us. God's going to give us a victory. Let's go. This is no problem. Sure, they're big. Sure, they're strong, but we have God on our side. At which point, the 10 other spies step in and start blowing things out of proportion. Yeah. It suddenly went from, I think it's interesting, because the original report is it's a good land. It went from that to it's a land that eats its inhabitants. That's a big change in like 4 verses. That we go from, it's a good land with a few giants, to, no, this is a land with lots of giants and the land will eat the inhabitants. What they're saying is if we try to go in that place, it's going to chew us up and spit us out. Even if we survive the giants and the strong people of the land's too hard, we won't survive that. And on hearing that, the passage says the people cried and called it off. They decided this is too hard, we're not going in. We know what God has said, we've all heard His promises, but this is just too hard. The same thing happens with Christians all the time, that they know that God has told them to go. They know that they ought to be serving Him, but let's be honest, that's hard. I know more men than I would like to say that went into the ministry but are now out because it was a lot harder than they thought it would be. Everyone seems to have this really odd idea that a pastor's job is really easy. I've had people tell me that a ton of times when I went into the ministry, but boy, that must be nice that you only have to work Sundays and Wednesdays. I'm not joking. People think they're serious about that. And I really have to fight laughing when I hear it. It doesn't quite work that way. It's hard work, not in the physical sense, but mentally and spiritually. My wife and I, when we first got married, she worked at a bank and I worked plumbing. And so it took some time for me to figure this out, because I would come home from work a day of 12, 14 hours of digging all day long. And I'd come home and say, I'm exhausted. And she would say, so am I. And I would think, you had 8 hours of sitting there. How can you be tired? And it took a long time for me to figure out that's tiring too, just in a different way. And a lot of people kind of get that mentality that, well, this can't, being in the ministry, it can't be hard. It's hard work, but if God's told us to go, He'll lead the way and He'll get the victory. Children of Israel here, they hear how difficult this is, that this is going to be, and they they cry out against going. To the point that the passage says they're ready to stone Moses and Aaron and Joshua and Caleb and anyone else that thinks they ought to go. Which, seems real intelligent. What good is this going to do? Now that we're out of Egypt with no place to go, no plan, let's kill the person who's leading us. This is a genius plan, but that, it's what they had in mind that they would do. We have so far a command to go, a call to go again, a cry against going, and then it brings to the last point this evening, and that's this: there is a consequence for not going. I already spent the entire first point explaining that this was a command from God. The people deciding that they are not going to go means that the people are choosing to go directly against what God commanded them to do. Here's what they're deciding. They are deciding that we are more worried about the people of the land and what they might do to us than we are worried to disobey God. They had more fear of the giants and the walled cities and the strong men and the land that eats its inhabitants than they had fear of God. And I guarantee you that if you asked them straightforward, this people wouldn't say that. You'd never hear that come out of their mouths. I mean, they followed God out of Egypt and followed him this far. They complained the entire way and were mad about it, but they had followed him. So they wouldn't say that they fear these men rather than God, but that's what their actions say. Their actions of, well, this is going to be too hard. There's giants. We can't do this. Their fear of the giants in the land shows their lack of trust in God. And because of it, God says there's going to be consequences. He doesn't force them to obey his command. He could have. He could have said, like it or not, this is what you're going to do. You're going to go into the land and you're going to be happy about it. We do that with our kids sometimes, right? You'll do this and you'll be happy about it. God didn't do that. It's not what he does. He allows them to go their way, but then says it won't be without consequence. I won't make you go in the land, but it won't be without consequence. Chapter 14, verse 22 and 23. Surely they shall not see the land which I swear unto their fathers, neither shall any of them that provoked me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he had another spirit with him, and hath followed me fully, him will I bring in a land whereunto he went, and his seed shall possess it. Now, I'll let them go their way. Here's what he's saying. I'll let them go their way, but I'll never allow them into the land. And we know what happens from here. They wander the desert for 40 years. God didn't even make it a quick death and punishment. They're going to have to live with the consequences of what they've done. So they literally wander until they die. Can you imagine walking every day, wandering a desert, knowing that we're going to keep doing this until everyone of this generation is dead? I have to think near the end of it, the next generation, that there would have been some animosity. They wanted to go in. And this is the awkwardness of I want to go in, but I can't until you're dead. This is a land God's promised me because you messed up. I can't until you die. Or what about men like Caleb who had done right, but because of the decision of the majority had to suffer the same consequences, had to wait 40 more years before he got to enter into the land. There was a consequence for not going, and a major consequence at that. Now, I told you I had 4 areas to go, 4 areas of go found here in this passage, and then an application. I'll give you that application, then we'll be done this evening. As a Christian, we've been given a command to go. I've said this throughout the series that for each one of us that go is different. That doesn't necessarily mean a mission field. It doesn't necessarily mean becoming a pastor, assistant pastor, anywhere else in the ministry. It might. I don't want to dismiss that, but that's not God's call for everyone. That go might instead mean being a witness at work or to your neighbors, reaching out to someone you see on the street, going door knocking, whatever. But no matter what it is, every one of us has been given a command to go. You know, you can read the Great Commission as many times as you want, and you'll never find an out. You'll never find an exemption. There's not one there. There's nothing saying, go ye therefore unless. Go ye therefore except for these people, or except for if you have these extenuating circumstances, you don't have to. No, it doesn't say that. There's no exemptions. Which leaves us with a choice, just like the children of Israel had. God won't force you to do His will. So you can either answer the call to go, like Joshua and Caleb did, or you can cry against the call, like the crowd. Just make sure you know the outcomes. I'm kind of one of those, if I'm going to make a decision, I want to know what the consequences are going to be of my decision. Joshua and Caleb called them to go. They were excited and ready, and because of it, they were blessed. And were the only ones of that generation to be allowed to enter the promised land. Those who went against the call had to face the consequences. And I am by no means trying to scare a person into serving God. But it stands true that when we go against His will, there's always a price to pay. Amen. So the challenge tonight is simply this. When God says, go, let's be a Caleb. Reply back with, Lord, I'm ready. Let's go. Let's pray.